Dobar dan, dobrodošli u Priboj i dobrodošli na još jedan događaj koji RES fondacija organizuje danas. Danas ćemo govoriti o energetskoj tranziciji, a pre nego što krenemo u temu, ja ću zamoliti našeg prijatelja Sašu Vasilića, koji je zamenik predsednika opštine Priboj, da nam se obrati i da pozdravi.
Hvala Tanja, dobar dan svima. Dobrodošli u Priboj, dobrodošli u jugozapadnu Srbiju, dobrodošli na tromeđu Srbije, Bosne i Hercegovine i Crne Gore. Nama je čast da danas, na Dan energetske efikasnosti, budemo domaćini u ovom međunarodnom skupu i nadam se da ćemo danas imati mnogo tema za razgovor. Dobri su govornici, dobra je tema i nadam se da ćemo svi zajedno izvući dobre zaključke i krenuti dalje u promene koje su nam jako bitne.
Hvala, Saša. Sada ćemo čuti pozdravnu reč gospodina Slobodana Cvetkovića, koji je generalni direktor Novosadskog sajma. On će nam se obratiti putem video zapisa.
Poštovani prijatelji, dame i gospodo, želim sve da vas pozdravim ispred Novosadskog sajma i da vam poželim dobrodošlicu na ovu prvu online, takozvanu virtualnu konferenciju na temu energetike. U ranijem periodu, u prvim danima marta, smo imali običaj da organizujemo sajam na temu investicije i energetike. Međutim, ove godine, iz razloga koji su svima poznati COVID-19 i svih ograničenja u broju ljudi koji mogu biti na jednom mestu, opredelili smo se da u ovom našoj prolećnoj sezoni Novosadskog sajma napravimo ovu online konferenciju Zagrljaj ili Sudar, koja praktično obrađuje sve one teme, najaktuelnije teme iz energetike. Kao i ranijih godina i ove godine ovaj događaj pripremamo u saradnji sa Pokrajinskim sekretarijatom za energetiku, saobraćaj i investicije, takođe i sa Ministarstvom republičkim za energetiku i tu je RES fondacija koja je uvek naš veran partner i već godinama unazad zajednički učestvujemo na ovim projektima. Nadam se da će svim učesnicima biti atraktivne teme koje smo delegirali i iskreno ćemo se potruditi, ukoliko epidemiološka situacija dozvoli, da na jesen napravimo jedan realan sajam energetike i investicije, normalno u saradnju sa svim našim partnerima. A eto, računajte da sa ovom današnjom konferencijom praktično pokušavamo da ostanemo u temi, da držimo tenziju u oblasti energetike, bar što se tiče Novosadskog sajma, i da okupljamo sve naše izlagače i posetioce i da i dalje budemo mesto na kome se obrađuju sve najaktuelnije teme iz energetike. Želim vam svima uspešan rad i vidimo se, nadam se, na jesen u realnom sajmu.
Hvala gospodinu Cvetkoviću na obraćanju i evo u ovaj uvodni deo ćemo da završimo takođe sa obraćanjem gospodina Ognjena Bjelića, koji je pokrajinski sekretar za energetiku, građevinarstvo i saobraćaj, takođe korišćenjem video linka.
Dame i gospodo, uvaženi učesnici konferencije, dragi panelisti, želim najprej da vas pozdravim u svojstvu sekretara za energetiku, građevinarstvo i saobraćaj. Istaknem da mi je veliko zadovoljstvo što zajednički ulažemo velike napore da manifestacija Međunarodni dan energetike i investicija na Novosadskom sajmu održi svoj kontinuitet i pored nestabilne globalne epidemiološke situacije i takođe ukažem na spremnost resornog pokrajinskog sekretarijata da pruži materijalnu, stručnu i logističku podršku za organizaciju ovog događaja u redovnom formatu. Racionalno korišćenje energije, poboljšanje energetske efikasnosti, smanjenje potrošnje energije za grejanje, hlađenje, ventilaciju, pripremu tople potrošne vode i smanjenje emisije štetnih gasova sa akcentom na proces dekarbonizacije, a posebno povećanje učešća obnovljivih izvora energije u ukupnom energetskom bilansu, samo je deo prioriteta u strategiji i poslovanju Pokrajinskog sekretarijata za energetiku, građevinarstvo i saobraćaj. Dekarbonizacija se odnosi na proces smanjenja emisije ugljen dioksida upotrebom izvora sa niskom emisijom ugljenika, čime se postiže niža emisija gasova sa efektom staklene bašte u atmosferi. U procesu dekarbonizacije se ističe potreba za povećanjem proizvodnje energije sa niskom emisijom ugljenika i smanjenjem upotrebe fosilnih goriva. Iz toga je upotreba obnovljivih izvora energije poput energije vetra, solarne energije, biomase i geotermalne energije veoma bitna. Obnovljivi izvori energije se šire primenjuju u svetu i sada proizvode trećinu svih energetskih kapaciteta širom sveta. Takođe, energetska efikasnost se postavlja kao prioritet za postizanje ciljeva emisije i poboljšanja kvaliteta vazduha i globalne temperature. Izvori energije koji proizvode manje ugljen dioksida su neki od najistaknutijih načina na koji se može postići dekarbonizacija. Dekarbonizacija je najviše napredovala u proizvodnji električne energije zbog velike primene obnovljivih izvora energije kao što su vetroturbine, solarni paneli i biogas postrojenja. S druge strane, pristup da domaćinstva mogu da proizvode i dele sopstvenu energiju takođe mogu dovesti do većih stopa dekarbonizacije. Kako je sama električna energija čišća, time pomaže samim korisnicima električne energije da u tom procesu postanu čistiji. Iako smatramo da je energetska tranzicija nešto daleko o čemu ne moramo još uvek da razmišljamo, situacija nije sasvim takva. Naime, primjenom zelenog dogovora, Evropska unija planira da ograniči uvoz robe i usluga sa visokim ugljeničnim intenzitetom. Kako Srbija ima ogromnu ekonomsku razmenu sa Evropskom unijom, to će značajno uticati i na Srbiju. Energija dobijena iz obnovljivih izvora postaje sve jeftinija i konkurentnija u odnosu na energiju dobijenu iz fosilnih goriva. Zato je važno da Srbija na vreme krene u korak sa svetom i putem pravedne energetske tranzicije, jer što duže čekamo, ekonomske posljedice će biti veće. Veoma je bitno i međusektorsko uključivanje svih nadležnih institucija po pitanju dekarbonizacije, jer se ovo pitanje može rešiti jedino kad svi zagađivači i korisnici daju svoj doprinos. Zahvaljujem vam se na pažnji i želim vam uspešnu realizaciju konferencije. Hvala lepo.
Good afternoon, everyone from the municipality of Priboj in Serbia, and good morning to those who are in time zones where it's still morning, and thank you everybody for joining together with us to listen to excellent presentations that we are going to have in this first panel. As you have already heard, the topic of today's meeting is energy transition, and we pose the question whether the energy transition is a cohesion or it is going to be a collision. The answer will depend on our skills to go through the energy transition. The goal is to preserve the climate, and this is really the goal that we need to achieve in order to survive and to continue development of the mankind. Today, we are really privileged to have speakers from all over the world with superb knowledge and superb presentation qualities. So I invite you to stay with us and to follow these presentations to inspire our thoughts for our future live event in autumn, when perhaps we will have more answers to the questions that we are going to ask ourselves. For the beginning, I'm inviting Ms. Françoise Jacob, UN Resident Coordinator to Serbia, to give us an introductory word that will provide the perspective of why we are discussing energy transition today.
Much. Can you hear me well?
Can hear you well.
Okay, good. So I'll start. Well, dobar dan svi. I'm really happy to be with you today. This is one of my favorite topics as UN Resident Coordinator. Let me start by saying that really the climate change agenda is coming back very fast to the forefront of development ambitions in the wake of the pandemic. For the UN, our marching orders are very clear. In 2021 and beyond, wherever we are, no matter the context, we have to work extra hard with our counterpart and our partners to plant the seeds for a greener, healthier, and more sustainable future. And that includes, of course, energy transition. And I want to quote something that the UN Secretary General said 2 days ago. He was addressing the summit of a new alliance, of an alliance that was set up 3 years ago. And this is the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And this is what he said: all planned coal projects around the world must be cancelled to end the deadly addiction to the most polluting fossil fuel. Now, I know that many of you are experts in the field and you have worked hard for the past 5 to 10 years to make, or even more, to make this transition a reality, including here in Serbia. There's been some successes, but it has also been a frustrating effort because of many reasons: politics, bureaucracy, vested interest, lack of awareness, lack of transparency, wrong narrative, no good data, etc. But I really believe that today in Serbia, there is a good window of opportunity. First, there is a greater awareness among citizens about climate change and a greater willingness to act. Second, there is also, I'm convinced of that, a greater awareness among the leadership of this country. And I have a feeling that it's taking a long time for the ship to change direction, but once it will change, it's going to go full speed. So really for me, it's not a matter anymore of if it will happen, but rather when, how, and how fast. So it will really still take a lot of efforts from many of us, those of us here and beyond, what I call the coalition of the willing, to make sure that meaningful changes happen. And so let me just make 4 short points in addition to this sort of introduction. First, energy transition is not only a matter of technology and financing. Sometimes we focus too much on that. Energy transition and other green transformation processes are a matter of rule of law, governance, and extensive engagement with communities and citizens. So we need a lot more awareness raising. We need the right incentives, the right schemes to promote change, and the right sticks in place at the national level, at the local levels, and they can also be external to the country, like some of the regulations that the EU is putting in place, such as the carbon adjustment mechanism to avoid carbon leakage. And this will most likely have an effect and apply on industries which are important export sectors for Serbia. And when these schemes start, Serbia's competitive advantage will be effective. So not to mention, of course, how difficult it might become in the future to insure fossil fuel industries. My second point is on the fact that energy transition is a huge opportunity for the private sector. And I think we really need to build this narrative there also, not just big companies, but also for small and medium-sized enterprise. If one looks just at the opportunities linked to make buildings more energy effective, this represents a very large market for SMEs that work in the construction sector. And at the UN, we really want to support these local and regional innovation initiatives. And we have started with air pollution. That leads me to my third point. Energy transition will also bring cleaner air. I won't go in the details, but this is going to be a big focus of our work with cities in the years to come. And finally, what is the role of the UN in all of this? So we will continue to work at many different levels, laws, policies, action plans, advocating for greater ambitions with the highest level of leadership, etc. But our mandate is also, and most importantly, about making sure that all people will benefit from the energy transition. We have to reach out to groups with special situation and needs, to the poorest neighborhood, to make sure that they have access to the services and the tools and financing. We have to really jumpstart the efforts to organize a just transition for coal industry workers. And as you know, this is extremely important in Serbia. To conclude, I will say once again that the green agenda, in which energy transition plays a big part, is an urgent agenda, but it's also a very exciting agenda. Now it's time to build the positive narrative and to engage with the youth of this country to build forward better. And really, I see this as a time for the education system at all levels to work very closely with the private sector and to ensure that the skills needed for the next 20 years are available and developed to build a better lifestyle for us, the generations to come, and for the planet. The green agenda for me is one of the best incentives that can be used in this region to flip the demographic dynamics that we always talk about here. So I really look forward to listening to all of you today. Hvala puno for inviting me, and good luck.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs, very much. I would say that the words that the agenda is urgent, but also exciting, and also that positive narrative can be built around this agenda is really a good way to introduce our panelists. As a moderator, sometimes you're required to engage your skills to tell a story. But moderating this panel is actually about letting my panelists tell the stories, because they can tell exciting stories, very fresh stories, and very relevant stories. I'm pleased and honored to welcome my panelists today, which are Dr. Zedong Zhang of the Global Energy Interconnection Development and Cooperation Organization, where he is heading the Research and Analysis Department, Dr. Griffin Thompson, Director of the Office for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency in the Bureau of Energy Resources of the State Department of the United States of America, and Dr. Felix Mates from the Institute for Applied Ecology from Freiburg. I would need more than 20 minutes per each panelist just to introduce them, but we don't have that time, so I'm really, really keen to pass on the words to my panelists for their exciting presentations. Dr. Zedong, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and participants, it's my great honor to get invited by RES Foundation to join this significant webinar, this conference. So I have a PowerPoint to share with you. Share screen. Okay, can you hear me?
Presentation, but yeah, we can see the next slide as well. Maybe you can change the layout so that we can see only one slide. So, but if not, I think this is also okay like this.
Okay. Is it working now?
Now this is okay. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Thank you for your time. And so today I'm going to talk about China's carbon neutral and energy interconnection. I guess everyone is interested and very surprising. Last year in September, when the president of Xi Jinping announced the China's carbon neutral goal. And today here, I'm going to talk about this goal and some kind of roadmap. But I guess the roadmap itself is more or less like a methodology, and the methodology itself can be very similar for all of the countries because it's science itself. There's not too much to change. But what matters most is how we are going to change it, how China is going to achieve it, and what is special around there. The one thing I want to highlight is energy interconnection. Not too much people mention this when they talk about the renewable energy and the carbon neutral, but this is actually one of the key factors to achieve this goal. So here we go. From here are the very official commitment. It's not it's very official one. It's about the Chinese carbon neutral commitment. The first of all is during the general debate of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The President Xi said that the Paris Agreement outlines the minimum steps to be taken to protect the Earth, our shared homeland, and all countries must take decisive steps to honor this agreement. China will scale up its intended nationally determined contributions by adopting more vigorous policies and measures. We aim to have carbon dioxide emissions peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. The second one very important really matters is Climate Ambition Summit. Again, he said that I wish to announce some further commitments for 2030. China will lower its carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP by over 65% from the 2005 level increase the share of non-fossil fuels in primary energy consumption to around 25%, increase the stock volume by 6 billion cubic meters from the 2005 level, and bring its total installed capacity of wind and solar power to over 1.2 billion kilowatts. I think here I just mentioned the 4 aspects. The first one is, so the commitment itself, what makes it strong is that it commits to take vigorous policies and measures. Measures. The second one is 2 very important goals. The first one is emission peak before 2030. Another one is carbon neutral before 2060. It's not go straight forward to carbon neutral, but it mentioned peak firstly. It means it's a very practical plan how it's going to achieve it. Another one is about the more recent and practical goals. It's about renewable energy, where the goal is to achieve 1.2 billion kilowatts. The number itself doesn't mean very clear, but let's take an example is that the total installed capacity of Europe is around 1 billion kilowatts. So here 1.2 billion kilowatts is almost like something like that. And also about a quarter of the installed capacity of China right now. So when we talk about the vigorous policies and the measures, so let's have a look at it. It means after the commitment, there must be actions immediately. So the actions here is about the policy. The first one is about the 14th five-year plan. The 5-year plan is about the guidance for the whole country to develop the economic and all the other works. It's a guidance for the whole country. So this plan, it mentioned that during the 14th five-year plan, the country will accelerate the promotion of green and low carbon development, reduce the intensity of carbon emissions, support the places where conditions are able to take the lead in reaching the peak of carbon emissions, and formulate an action plan for peaking carbon emissions before 2030. The second one is during the Central Economic Work Conference. This conference is led by the President Xi. So this is another very important decision as well. It mentioned that carbon peaking and carbon neutralization will be one of the 8 key tasks in 2021 for the government. So what's important in the next year is the government will formulate an action plan for carbon emissions peaking by 2030. Okay, so when we talk about for China to achieve the carbon neutral, actually it's very, very challenging. If we look at the figure, you will see that China has huge emissions because the economy of China is large and the energy demand is very high. The energy structure is dominated by coal, basically. In 2019, the total carbon emissions account for 29% of the world, and the per capita carbon emissions are 46% higher than the world average. So if we look at China, it's almost 2 times of the United States and 2.5 times of the emission of EU 28. It's not a good news for China because it means it's even harder for China to achieve carbon neutral. And another great challenge is that the tight time left to reduce the carbon emissions, because China is a developing country compared to developed countries where industrialization and urbanization are basically completed, which means carbon peaking has been achieved already, and there long time, around 60 years, for the developed countries to transfer from carbon peaking to carbon neutral. In contrast, China is still a developing country. It's still in the development stage of industrialization and urbanization, with very high carbon intensity energy structure, actually. So there are only less than 10 years to achieve the peak of carbon from now to 2030, and only another 30 years to achieve carbon neutral, which means the need of very, very hard work. So although the challenge is huge, China is trying to find the solution. And the suggested roadmap or the solution is called tool replacement. Why is that? If we look at the figure just before, for China, the energy takes most of the emission, more than 80%. So if the carbon neutral is a goal, the energy transition will be the key. The carbon emission problem is actually essentially an energy problem. The most solution is energy transition. Fossil fuel accounts for 85% of primary energy and generates approximately 9.8 billion tons of carbon emissions per year, accounting for nearly 90% of total social emissions. The solution to this the key for energy transition is called tool replacement. It's two parts. The first part is called generation replacement. It means use renewable energy to replace fossil fuels. Hopefully, the renewable energy can account for 65% of primary energy. The second part is called consumption replacement, where electricity will replace fossil fuels for heating and transportation sectors. And how here is a quick introduction about the actions China has taken, the achievements so far. So according to the tool replacement, let's talk about the consumption replacement firstly. Here, the EV is taken an example. The EV stock, including BEV and PHEV, is 3.35 billion, nearly half of the world in China right now. As the figure here, it shows this part is the stock of China, the EV stock in China. The second example is generation replacement. It means use wind and PV hydro to replace fossil fuels. And here is what has achieved so far by 2020 for wind. It's nearly more than, it's about 280 gigawatts. It's nearly half of the world. And for solar PV, we can see the accumulated installed capacity near 250, also almost nearly absolutely the number one place in the world. We can see a bump in wind installed capacity in 2020, which means the wind power in China is accelerating. However, there are still huge challenges for China to achieve achieve the energy transition. It's because even though there are a lot of PV and wind has been installed, they are far away from the demand centers. So here we can see for the wind, you can see in the red places are the places with a good resource of wind. They are actually located at the north and the northwest of China. And for the PV, 90% of the best resource are distributed at north and the west as well. However, the demand are all near the coast in the east. So we have to transfer the energy from the north and the northwest to the east. And what is the solution? The solution is energy interconnection. So this is a key solution for China, which is nearly not very oftenly mentioned by other countries. The problem is the reverse distribution of energy and demand. The solution here is energy interconnection. The technology is UHV technology, ultra high voltage transmission lines. The advantage of it, let me take an advantage, which is take an example, is this line. As you can see, it's from Zhendong, from Xinjiang until Wannan to the Nanjing to nearly Shanghai. The distance is more than 3,000 kilometers. This is nearly the distance between Brussels to Istanbul of Turkey. So imagine it can cross the whole continent of Europe. So it can transfer the energy from the very west of China to the east coast. And I'm not just talking about one miracle here. There are actually 24 such UHV projects in China already, and there are another 8 projects are under construction. And all the lines here formulates the energy interconnection I just mentioned. Such long distance power transmission make the connection of power grid of different countries, and even make the power grid of the whole Earth, make it one, make it this possible. So we have this global energy interconnection initiative. It is on September 26, 2015, the Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed a major initiative on establishing global energy interconnection, or you can say it GEI, at the UN Sustainable Development Summit, offering a Chinese solution to the world energy transition and sustainable development. This is a natural result, but not an ambition. I can explain here. If you find the essence of this global energy interconnection, it is actually a modern energy system towards clean energy production, widespread energy allocation, and electricity-based energy consumption. Why this is proposed is based on the basic facts. If we look at the global power map, in 2050, the total capacity of intercontinental and interregional power flow can reach 720 gigawatts, of which 130 gigawatts is intercontinental. And in 2070, this will be even larger. These are required to achieve these are the renewable energy required to achieve the carbon neutral goal. And the only way to achieve such power flows, for example, the wind power from the North Sea to Europe, is only to using transmission lines. So all these transmission lines will naturally formulate a global energy grid, or we call it energy interconnection. Here is a guideline for this backbone grid outlook. Based on the power grids of all countries in the world, a 9 horizontal, 9 vertical backbone grid of GEI can be formulated, connecting large-scale clean energy bases and load centers to achieve global allocation of clean energy resources across different time zones and seasons, and mutual support and backup. So the energy here is very simple because the renewable energy can unpredictable using such transmission lines, so everyone can share the renewable energy. It coincides with the concept of UN, everyone share the clean and affordable electricity. So when I have wind, you can use mine. When I don't lack of wind, I can use your PV, etc. And the value is huge and comprehensive. The most important one is to reduce the carbon emission. This GEI system can greatly promote the development of renewable energy and therefore reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. And the organization holding this or promoting this idea is called GETCO. This is also the organization where I come from. Here are some achievements. So far, we have over 1,000 members, including ABB, Siemens, State Grid, many companies and partners. We have a lot of research results, over 30 reports so far, and many journals. We have signed MOU with many UN divisions, including WMO, UNIDO, UNDESA, UFCCC, the most important one. We have activities like annual conference. We joined the COP26 and the COP26 for sure as well next year or this year in Glasgow. And for the topic today, we are talking about is China's carbon peak and carbon neutral roadmap. We just we are going to publish a report about this, showing more details about this topic. The data is on the 18th of March. If you're interested in it, please feel free to check our website, or you can send me an email. So I will send you the link for the conference to check what will be the roadmap and the goals and the methodology to achieve China's carbon peak and carbon neutral. However, even though China has so many wind power and solar power, but it's still far away from enough. If we just keep the step what we are holding right now, where we call it a basic scenario, the carbon reduction can only be around 10 to 20%, so far away from achieving the carbon neutral. And if we take 2 degree scenario, it will only achieve 50 to 60% carbon reduction. So the conclusion is that we have to trying to meet the 1.5 degree scenario, where around 75 to 85% carbon emission will be reduced by 2050, and therefore to achieve the commitment, which is 2060, China will achieve the carbon neutral. Here are the methodologies for China to achieve carbon neutral. I put it in the last because it's almost the same for each country, almost the same. There are many different ways to make the division. Here I highlight the most important 4 parts. The first one is energy generation replacement. The methodology to achieve this is very unique, and the important that I highlighted here is energy interconnection based on UHV grid. It will greatly help the adoption of renewable energy to help it become more economic and affordable. Because based on our analysis, if we use other methodologies like storage or hydrogen, the price can be extremely high, nearly 100 to 120 US dollar per ton of carbon dioxide. However, if we have this energy interconnection grid, which means the renewable energy can be more efficiently used in an economic way, the price for this carbon reduction can be greatly lowered to around $40 per ton of the carbon dioxide. The other 3 very important factors for energy generation replacements are electricity carbon market, promote wind, solar, hydro, and promote the storage. Here, the goal of China, one of the scenario, I'm sorry for this translation, but no problem. So the red one is fossil fuels, the coal. In 2050, ideally, the coal will disappear because China is heavily based on coal right now. Because the economic is still growing, so in 2050, the installed capacity of the whole power system is expected to grow to develop greatly to nearly 7,000 gigawatts from less than 2,000 gigawatts right now. And you can see that the wind and the solar are the main parts. So ideally, the goal is by 2050, the clean energy can account for 94% of the whole electricity generation mix. Based on our idea about energy interconnection, the power transmission can reach 1,000 gigawatts. Therefore, as a result, the carbon reduction in energy can move from 5.2 billion to reduced to 230 million tons. The second part is about energy consumption replacement. The most important 3 parts are buildings, industry, and transportation. Here are more ideas about electrification of heating and cooling, electrification of industries like steel, cement, and chemicals, using hydrogen or maybe even power to X to help the planes and the shipping. The third one is industrial structure upgrade. China is looking forward to upgrade the upgrading of high emission industries, the development of modern manufacturing and the service industries, modern economic industrial system based on clean energy and electricity. The last one is about energy efficiency and negative emissions. It's about industry upgrading, a more lower carbon lifestyle, more trees and CCUS. That's it, thank you. And the very last, please remember we have a report going to be published. More details can be found there. If you are interested in, please do check our website or just kindly send an email to me. Thank you very much.
So I'm shaking the hands also with you. Thank you, Zedong, for your presentation. I picked up some words that I remembered from your presentation. I think much more action is required is a call for everybody here. So much more action is required. Much more action is required. It sounds like a crisis. And the crisis needs to be tackled. So we are shaking hands with you, but we are also shaking hands with our next panelists and speakers. And until the grid energy interconnection is in place, we are going to use this interconnection and this grid that we are having now So via internet network, we are moving from the country which is the largest CO2 emitter to the second largest CO2 emitters. This is important to understand because those countries are the countries that we need to follow in the tackle of the climate crisis. We welcome Dr. Griffin Thompson, who is going to tell us a little bit more what we can expect from the United States of America in tackling the climate crisis at home, which means in the United States, and abroad, which also means in Priboj, Serbia. So we are very keen to listen to you, Dr. Thompson.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I welcome the opportunity to talk about what the United States is doing. 2021 is a crucial year in the global energy transition, marking the culmination of the world's road to Glasgow, where this November, COP26 will be held, and all members of the Paris Agreement will need to reaffirm and increase their climate ambitions. In my remarks today, I will first discuss the significance of the Biden administration's recent executive orders on climate, and will then describe the role of my office, the Office of Renewable Energy, in materializing these climate goals around the world. In the United States, we play a leading role in the energy transition, both by setting an example with our own policies, as well as encouraging ambition among others. Just days into his administration, President Biden signed a suite of new executive orders related to climate, which set the United States on a path to net zero emissions by 2050, and emphasized the administration's appreciation for the gravity of the climate crisis. Perhaps most important in President Biden's executive order is the orienting of all foreign policy decisions around the dangers of climate change, acknowledging the risk that climate change poses to the entire international system. The president also instituted the Office of Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, led by former Secretary of State John Kerry, to encourage other nations to treat the climate crisis with the same urgency as the United States. The Special Envoy's office ensures that climate considerations are at the very forefront of all U.S. foreign policy relationships, and that countries continue to expand the scope of their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, ahead of COP26. The executive orders also aims to advance the principle of ensuring a just and fair energy transition. President Biden has committed to both prioritize the interests of communities who have historically suffered environmental injustice, as well as to find ways to protect the economic livelihoods of regions which rely on fossil fuel production. In both of these contexts, the Biden administration has made clear that it primarily views the energy transition as an opportunity to create jobs, to promote diverse, resilient, low carbon, and secure energy systems, and to protect a healthy environment for generations to come. Increasingly, renewable energy technologies like wind and solar represent the cheapest available form of power generation. Global investment flows recognize this reality. Renewables have captured the bulk of global power generation investment every year since 2015. This transformation will only accelerate as costs continue to decline and enabling technologies like energy storage become more cost-effective. Public and private resource flows also increasingly appreciate financial instruments like green bonds and ESG disclosures, which quantify the sustainability commitments of investment opportunities. This investor appetite all around the world will create openings for new forms of sustainable investing, especially in markets which have struggled to attract ample investment flows in the past. However, despite these positives, this transformation is not happening at the speed or the scale required to effectively achieve mid-century decarbonization. Strong policy is required to bolster this organic transition and ensure capital flows to clean energy projects in all sectors. Government, industry, and civil society all need to pull together to mobilize resources and direct policy. The Biden administration is committed to filling its role and fulfilling its leadership in this effort. The administration of the Biden presidency will seek to help countries around the world with aggressive deployment of renewable energies in the power sector, including linkages with battery storage. The Biden administration will explore paths towards decarbonizing the industrial sector with hydrogen and other low carbon fuels, offering possibilities for emissions reductions in a sector which previously looked challenging to abate. To complement variable renewables resources, the Biden administration will advocate for continued technological improvements and deployments of advanced nuclear energy, including small modular reactors, which represent a promising low-carbon option for expanding both electricity across and other clean energy services around the world. For the feasible deployment of all these technologies, however, the world will need to do a lot more mining. We'll also have to ensure the security of energy-related supply chains. Within the State Department's Bureau of Energy Resources, we lead the Energy Resources Governance Initiative, ERGI, which encourages best practices in minerals extraction and the development of resilient supply chains in the minerals that are most important to enabling global energy transitions. Serbia is endowed with significant resources of lithium, one of the most crucial minerals for global energy transitions, and will be an important player in protecting the quality and resiliency of the lithium supply chain going forward. Serbia's announcement that it will invest 10 billion euros in its power and mining sectors is an important step for Serbia to take full advantage of its renewable energy potential to support energy security and opportunities for power export to its neighbors. We will continue working with Balkan countries to improve the competition and efficiency of regional electricity markets. Regional trade in electricity and other energy products is a powerful force for market integration, spurring sustainable development and greater potential to export power to continental Europe. Maximizing the efficiency of Serbian energy markets and expanding renewable energy penetration will also be beneficial for Serbia's local air quality and therefore overall local environmental health. The energy transition provides both the opportunity and the obligation for countries in the Balkans and around the world to reevaluate energy systems in a way that both encourages sustainable environmental outcomes while spurring economic development. Now, allow me a moment to explain some of the programs we at the State Department participate in towards these ends. The State Department plays a major role in global energy markets, and under the Biden administration is committed to focusing this role within the framework of an effective energy transition. I am the director of the Office of Renewable Energy, which sits inside the State Department's Bureau of Energy Resources. We engage with partner countries all around the world in a wide range of activities to promote and accelerate the adoption of renewable energy, clean energy technologies, and energy efficiency solutions. One of our major objectives with all countries we interact with is promoting energy market structures that attract outside investment and ensure grid resilience. The energy transition will require monumental investment outlays, and my office helps partner countries to adopt the policies necessary to capitalize on investors' eagerness to participate in the energy transition. Listen, the machines work. It's the institutions, the policy and regulatory scaffolding necessary to support the machines that don't work. We help partner countries with technical assistance programs and various exchanges to identify the appropriate policies and regulations and the most efficient paths towards expanding energy access and reducing carbon emissions. These efforts go far beyond renewables, and we also support programs in digitalization, grid interconnectivity of the kind we just heard, and energy storage. We also work closely with the US private industry to promote exports of clean technologies and identify opportunities for US firms to engage in projects that help meet the energy market goals of host countries, filling gaps which would be challenging to meet without our facilitation. Beyond these specific types of engagement, the energy transition provides the United States and partner countries with a new platform to demonstrate shared beliefs and common goals. For example, the US and Europe share common strategic objectives in energy policy, energy security, energy access, environmental security, and of course, economic prosperity. My office is working with others in the Energy Bureau and within the State Department and beyond to develop a set of policy directives to guide sustainable energy transition in the Balkans, where the region has the opportunity to optimize its approach to these pressing and integrated challenges. The focus for these directives is to guide transformative regional energy infrastructure improvements, specifically those that enable the deployment of clean energy and decarbonizing technologies and services. In tandem, U.S. energy market policy for the region will be predicated on the tenets of modern energy markets in the integration of advanced energy technologies. These tenets emphasize an optimized intra and cross-sectoral alignment of transparent and competitive energy markets, as well as the expansion of energy market offerings, incentives, and governance requisite for attracting significant market activity, innovation, and foreign direct investment from the private sector. The overarching goal will be to develop sustainable, integrated, and a modernized energy system that underpins an equitable and prosperous clean economy for the region. My office works to facilitate similarly fruitful transitions in regions all across the world. Although this moment certainly presents a daunting task, we must all recognize its urgency and set an example for tackling other global challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. If you'll allow me, I would like to ask you a very brief question. So if you would like to answer, you used to be a climate negotiator for the United States, if I understand correctly. So, if you can compare the times when you were negotiating and the present times, do you see that the overall framework is more favorable to global action than it used to be, or it's perhaps vice versa?
Oh, I think we sit at a wonderful time in history. When I was negotiating just years prior to the Paris Agreement, we were still doing the hard slog and trying to figure out what the various components of such an internationally agreed agreement would be. All the negotiators came together in Paris and agreed on a document that, while is not perfect, certainly sets us on the right path. And I think the world sits at a wonderful time where through this year and with engaged leadership from the United States, as well as leadership from countries around the world, we're going to see increased ambition. We're going to see the realization of the spirit of Paris. And we're going to see how we put Paris into practice through hard work, implementation, and the transformation of the markets across the world that'll usher in and accelerate an age of renewable energy.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. UN Resident Coordinator called for a building of a positive narrative in the introductory speech. I think we've heard some positive narrative, and I would like to underline that it's based in the reality. I mean, we hear a positive narrative from Dr. Thompson, who is engaged and who was engaged in climate negotiations in the past, and who is very well positioned to understand the change in the framework in which we are acting together. We've heard again the words about urgency, which is really, I think, an underlying word, but also with this positive narrative, I think we are better equipped to reach the speed and the scale. You mentioned that we need better speed and larger scale in coming up with the solutions. And also, once again, we underline that this is energy transition is an opportunity and an obligation. And this is why we also called our event Cohesion or Collision. So it's up to us how we will resolve use best the opportunities and also do what's our obligation in order to make for the future generations also opportunities for the development. So thank you once again, Dr. Thompson. It was really a pleasure to hear also the positive narrative. And with these positive narratives, we are going to move to the Institute for Applied Ecology and to the Dr. Felix Mates, who also used to work in creation of visions for the entire continent when energy transition is concerned. But today he is going to present to us a very concrete policy tool that is being deployed in Germany, and I think a policy tool that is very relevant for the countries in this region and which tells us a lot about the future of the energy sector and about the directions for the energy transition that we need to take. Dr. Mattes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can see my presentation. We now change a little bit the perspective. We are going for a deep dive to some practical experiences and practical implementation efforts for on the pathway towards climate neutrality. 2 words to my background. Öko-Institut is a private research organization, non-profit. We are working partly for the German government, partly for European institutions, and partly for the World Bank and NGOs and some industries at the interface between science and policy and politics, which is always an important issue. I have served, for example, in the German Coal Commission, at the moment at the National Hydrogen Council. So these are some practical experiences, and the target of this, or the goal of this presentation is, number one, to give you a little bit of context of climate policy in my country, and secondly, to present you one of the mechanisms we are using at the moment to make progress on the way towards climate neutrality. I think the first important thing to know on my country is we have a long history of climate policy. The first climate action programs stems from June 1990, and we have made some progress here. So without the special circumstances of the Corona pandemic, we would have arrived last year at an emission reduction of 40% compared to 1990. With the Corona pandemic effects, it was 40%. However, 10 percentage points out of these 35% comes from the German unification, the modernization, and the crash of the East German industry. What you can see here is, number one, the structure of emissions in 1990 and in 2019, and the emission trajectories for different sectors. And what you can see here, number one, the result of this 40% emission reduction is a result of very divergent trends. So we have made progress in the industrial emissions. We made some progress with regard to the buildings. We made some progress with regard to the commercial sector. So we have too slow emission reductions for the power sector. The transportation sector ran totally out of control. The blue line shows you the cars, and the light blue line shows you the emission trends from the heavy-duty vehicles, and we have a mixed result from the industry. However, if you look to the structure of emissions, the power sector is still the single largest source of emissions, approximately 40% of the German emissions, and 80% out of the 40% come from coal. And that means the power sector and the decarbonization of the power sector is one of the key levers to reduce emissions to climate neutrality by the mid of the century. And it is also a key enabling sector, because for decarbonization, we will need to produce a lot more electricity in a climate neutral way. However, this is all a part of a longer transition. You can see here the power generation structures since 1950, Eastern Germany and Western Germany in total, and you can see here the raise, the stagnation, and now the phase-out pathway for nuclear. You can see the impressive rollout of renewables, but you can also see the significant role of power generation from coal, which is one of the key challenges for reaching emission reductions in my country. This is again another graph of the power generation in Germany since 1990. That means since the German unification, and there are a couple of points you should have a look on. Number one, the conventional wisdom in Germany with famous companies, with famous professors in the year 93 has been the technical potential for rolling or for using renewable energy sources for power generation is 4%. We have arrived last year at a level of 35%, or 2 years ago 35%. Last year it has been 40%. This is almost the half of the domestic consumption. However, we had almost no change in the shares of low carbon generation of power. That means natural gas. The role of natural gas has been almost constant for all the years, and the level of high carbon fossil generation has also been almost constant over the year, because the rollout of renewables has not squeezed out the coal-fired power generation, but it has shifted the coal-fired power generation into exports. So beginning with the turn of the century, Germany went more and more to be a significant exporter of high carbon electricity. So we have exported almost 10% of the domestic electricity generation to neighboring countries, and all this has come from coal. And that means the power sector, the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions from the power sectors remained behind schedule. And that is an important observation, because the German energy policy has been focused very much on the rollout of renewables and innovation. And in the mid of the 2010s, around 2015, it became clear that a more holistic approach is needed. And at least we need to have a symmetric approach which addresses 4 different strategies. Number one, it's clear we need to pave the way for the clean or zero carbon options, ramp up policy, market designs, etc., etc. That has been the traditional focus of German energy policy. However, the effects with the coal power, with the remaining significant share of the coal and the power generation, has led to a learning that the exit game for the non-sustainable options needs to be designed actively. That means there needs to be a specific policy, not only to bring in the new options, but also to design the exit game for the high carbon options. And for Germany, this is also the nuclear phase out. And I think this is the first blind spot we discovered, or policy discovered after the year 2010, when we had more and more renewables, but not that significant emission reductions. The third trigger and the third point is important, because these new options are always infrastructure intensive. And that there is a certain lead time which is needed to trigger the necessary infrastructure adjustment is important. So we have huge projects of infrastructure rollouts, but all these projects are beyond schedule. And triggering the necessary infrastructure adjustment with sufficient lead times is one of the key points which needs to be addressed more actively and more systematically and more strategically. The fourth strategy of this holistic strategical approach is innovation. So this has always been one of the strengths of German energy policy, because this is an engineering companies. We have a lot of innovation. We have seen a lot of innovation. We have a lot of innovation in the pipeline. At the moment, I'm serving in the National Hydrogen Council, and there's so much innovation and so much advancement in the process. This is not the key problem. The key political problem is to have a careful differentiation at what point in time innovation can play a role. So that means hydrogen can't replace the rollout of infrastructure as it is perceived in some of the political debates. However, because the designing the exit game has been the blind spot of the German energy policy and the pathway towards climate neutrality. Here you can see some historical steps how this policy came into place. We have a long tradition, and we had hard fights for the phase out of coal mining. We had in 2015 the perception that solely putting all efforts on rolling out the renewables is necessary but not sufficient. Then in 2018 and 2019, the Coal Commission was set up, which provided recommendations. Number one, on the coal phase-out trajectory and the coal phase-out mechanisms, but also developed the program for structural support for the former or for the coal regions. We are at the moment in the implementation process. We are in the middle of the process of the European Green Deal, which will change the economic framework significantly for coal power generation in Europe because of the increasing CO2 prices. And so that means there will be probably an acceleration of this process. This is the trajectory which was proposed by the Coal Commission. It is a steady decline of the coal capacities with three landmarks: 2022, 2030, and an end at least or at the latest in the mid of 2030s. You can see here that there are different trajectories for lignite and for hard coal, and there is a lot of debate. It will be faster, but the key message is that there was a very clear trajectory on what pathway the coal capacities should be phased out and the emissions from coal-fired power stations should be decreased. There are essentially, and that also comes from the Coal Commission's, 5 different mechanisms to push the coal out of the market. The first is the market-driven closures. Fuel prices, natural gas prices play a role. CO2 prices. The rollout of renewables limits the potential share of coal-fired power generation, and with the recent level of CO2 prices of levels around 40 euros per ton of CO2 will definitely accelerate parts of the coal phase out. We have secondly tenders for the decommissioning of hard coal power plants for the period from 2021 to 2026. I will show you some details on this. We have a third pillar, which is the negotiated decommissioning premiums for lignite mines and lignite power plants. The lignite segment of the power sector is not subject to the tenders because the market concentration is too high, because essentially the lignite segment is run by 2 operators and 2 owners, and that would be not sufficient to be handled in tendering procedures. We have a fourth pillar. We have incentives for replacing coal combined heat and power plants, which play a certain role, especially with regard to hard coal. And there is a program which provides attractive incentives to substitute these hard coal-fired CHP plants by natural gas or other low-carbon sourced CHP plants. And from the year 2030 onwards, we have a legally forced closure. That means there is no longer any compensation, and there is a legally binding pathway to cancel the permits of the coal-fired power stations. There are other elements with regard to the accelerated rollout of power generation of renewables. We have set up a more stringent system to roll out the transmission and distribution network infrastructure. We have a new system to guarantee system adequacy, because essentially the coal system represented in the past a share of 60% of the firm capacity, which is an important element to ensure system adequacy. And we have heavy investment in innovative technologies. This is the part of energy and climate policy of the coal phase-out program. I have an addendum for this presentation. If you want to read the slides, there are also some more details on the element of just transition, which is the second pillar of the coal phase out. Number one, the pathway and the decommissioning mechanisms, but the second pillar is a very comprehensive program for the regions which are heavily affected by the coal phase out. The tenders for the hard coal power plants is an interesting element because it combines a clear decommissioning trajectory with a market-based instrument to push out the hard coal based capacities out of the markets. The Federal Network Agency, which is our main regulator for the electricity sector, runs at least up to 7 tenders for decommissioning of hard coal. These tenders started in September 2020. We are at the moment in the middle of the second tender, and in the end of April, the third tender for decommissioning premium starts. These tenders will provide decommissioning of hard coal-fired power plants from 2020 to 2026. The plant operators can take part in these tenders with a bid of a certain amount of euros per kilowatt, and they need to provide also the information on the verified emissions for the latest 3 calendar years. And the ranking in the tenders is done not by the bid per capacity, but by the bid per ton of CO2 historical emissions. That means that the power plants with the highest emission decrease will be ranked higher than power plants which have significant capacity but which are not run that long and have not produced a lot of CO2. The bids are awarded for the plants until the tendered capacity is at least reached. You will see this, and the premiums will be paid on a pay-as-bid basis. And if a plant or an operator is successful in the tender, the operation permits of the plants will be cancelled. We have the first results of these tenders, which are significant. You can see here the schedule. So the first tender was about 4 gigawatts, and for the next years, the tenders will range between 1 and 2.5 gigawatts. And the surprising result from the first result was that relatively modern plants have been awarded because they had so high emissions. And I think this is an important point, that the modern plants have low specific emissions, but they are operated much or significantly longer than the old plants. That means that the emission reduction for decommissioning the relatively modern plants could be more attractive from an economic perspective than getting out the older plants first. And the second surprising result was that the awarded premiums was, at least the average of the awarded premiums was significantly lower than the price caps. So there was a price cap in the first tender of 165 euro per kilowatt. The average decommissioning premium was only 66. That means the tender has reflected the more and more complicated market framework for hard coal capacity, and that means that these instruments can work if you have decided to follow not only the price out trajectory for shutting coal-fired power plants down, but also to have a buy-out element in this phase-out trajectory. I hope this has provided some insights on the practical experiences from an actively managed coal phase-out policy. Again, there is an addendum to my presentation where you can find a lot more information, some further reading, but also some detailed information on the program which was set up to compensate for jobs in the coal mines and in the coal-fired power plants, as well as to support the regions which are specifically affected by the coal phase-out policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Matus. If you can perhaps switch to a slide 13, we will discuss something else, but I would like our audience to see the slide 13, if this is okay for you. And while you are moving to the slide 13, I would pick what I understood from your presentation, that in 1993, people were saying that technical capacity, possible technical capacity of renewable energy was estimated at 20 terawatt hours, if I understood correctly your presentation, while in 2018, what you have achieved is 200 terawatt hours. So sometimes the engineers and the technicians that make estimations are not very correct. So what has been estimated at 20, 25 years ago is now in operation as 200. So the innovations also take, I would say, a role in increasing this share of renewables, but sometimes the estimations are also driven by the bounded rationalities, I would say, and the perspective of those who make estimations. And I would also like to somehow perhaps summarize, if I read correctly your presentation, is that the German government has bought plants for the price of 66,000 euros per 1 megawatt for closure. I mean, maybe it's oversimplified interpretation, but correct me if I'm wrong. This would be one of the readings of your presentation.
Yeah, that's true, and I think again back to 93. This has not been somebody. These have been the leading scientists of the countries and the leading utilities of the countries. And again, so we have decided to go for a mixture between pricing out and buying out, and for the hard coal, at least for the first tender, today or in the beginning of next week, the results of the second tender will be published, and we will see how this develops. But again, so for the hard coal, the buyout premium has at the moment the market-based fixed buyout premium is an average 66,000 euros per megawatt, or 66 euros per kilowatt.
I think this is a rather strong signal for everybody in the market and for everybody who follows what's going on in Germany. And I would say the whole world is actually following what's going on in Germany in this particular context. So I would say I can be an optimist, because our estimations were 10 times lower than what we can achieve today. So this gives us hope for the energy transition, and this gives us, I think, a direction for the future. The last question I would like to ask all of you, if you can perhaps be present in autumn, what would you say to the people who gather in our event in autumn, which is called Energy and Investment Days? So what would be the message for the decision makers and for the investors? I know it's not very easy, it doesn't have to be a critical message, but if you would pick one sentence to tell to the audience gathered in the autumn, which sentence would that be? Dr. Matus, would you perhaps start?
Yeah, I think there are two recommendations. The number one is you need to fix a perception of the market participants where the pathway is leading to. And I think this has been always one of the advantages of German policy, that we have been very clear what the trajectory is. And the second is to be flexible to establish a robust framework. We had long years experiences with the feed-in tariff. We have substituted this by tenders, but that there is a belief in the market that there will be instruments which guide these long-term and accountable trajectory. So carbon pricing plays a role. In future, we will put much more efforts on market design, because so we are at the moment at the 50% renewables. That means we see a lot of hours in the year where we have prices of zero at the wholesale market. And the third element and that somehow relates to market design. So in Europe and in Germany and let's say in Northern Europe, we are a little bit free riding on the market liberalization without making the network operators neutral players in the game, and without setting neutral regulatory authorities. Even the feed-in tariffs and all the other instruments would have not worked that well. And I think this is important, that restructuring of the energy market with unbundling and having neutral regulators is one of the three pillars which I would say are important. And you shouldn't focus only on one of these pillars. Because without a pathway, without an accountability, let's say financial framework, and without a robust market framework with very clear and differentiated and neutral roles, these are important elements.
Dr. Thompson, would you try to share with us a possible message for our participants in the autumn event?
Of course, Alexander. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I would just encourage everybody listening to, in the coming year and years beyond, to think big and to think more expansively about what energy means. Energy is much more than electrons pulsating through wires or molecules moving through pipelines. We have a rare opportunity in human history to transform our social political institutions, to address issues beyond simply energy poverty and energy access. Climate change requires, in fact, us to think in ways that we have not thought before and look at the interconnections, the linkages between the energy service delivery systems that we are creating and the issues of economic inequality and social injustice. That is why countries around the world are looking at the energy transition more in a way of an energy transformation, to look more than simply how do we get cleaner energy, electrons and molecules through wires and pipelines, but how do our energy systems, how do our energy infrastructures, how do we work with one another, how do we treat one another in ways that will respond to some of the higher values and virtues of life.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Zhang, would you have perhaps a message for our participants in the autumn gathering?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much. My answer is very particular for your question for the policy and investors. The first one is the time is really urgent because most of the country have the commitment to achieve carbon neutral by 2050 or 2060. But actually it means for the energy sector, it has to be achieved carbon neutral 10 years ahead of this deadline because we have left another 10 years for the other industry sectors, which is the hardest one to achieve carbon neutral. So for, let's say 2040, so it's only 20 years left for the whole energy sector to achieve carbon neutral, which is really, the time is really urgent because I work in the energy sector. I know how long it takes one transmission line to be built. It takes 10 years. So for 2 rounds, we have to have an energy system for the carbon neutral. Is a lot of work should be done. So it's the first one is time is really urgent. The second one is really challenging because if we are talking about carbon neutral, the first step is to achieve carbon neutral for the electricity sector itself. But however, if you look at most of the country, the renewable energy only takes around 50 to 60% of the whole electricity sector. And the electricity itself is only a quarter of the whole energy sector. So the energy sector, beyond energy sector, there are still industry sector left. There are transportation, there are many steel, cement. So how long does it really take from us from now to achieve carbon neutral of electricity, and then the carbon neutral for the whole energy, and then for everything? So it's really challenging. The work is really hard. The third one is I totally agree with Dr. Griffin that it's a global issue, this climate change. So no one can solve this problem by himself. So we have to share our goals, share our steps to solve this problem together, move hand by hand. And that's also the idea of our global energy interconnection, which we share the electricity and the renewable energy and achieve development together. The first one is a positive message for the investors, that we encourage the solid investment on renewable energies, because the renewable energy more and more bankable and profitable. The fossil fuel energy can meet their peak very recently. During this pandemic, it proves that the return from the traditional fossil fuels is not as good as before. So please be more confident to invest in renewable energies, because once I have talked with the CEO of Trina, one of the biggest PV manufacturers, he mentioned that even the policy is ideal, financial is ideal, I still cannot meet the carbon neutral goal. As why? Because he said, I just don't have that capability to manufacture enough PV panels. So he's speaking in this in a happy mood, because it means there are a huge market left for him. So please, investors, be confident, invest in renewable energies, no matter the project itself or the manufacturers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zhang. With this sense of urgency, but also with a positive narrative, and by recalling the higher values, I thank to my panelists, and a special thanks go to Dr. Thompson, who really got up very early to join us for this panel. Thank you, everybody, once again. And I invite the audience to stay with us and to hear what is it that we are doing at the local level here in Serbia, in Priboj. Thanks once again.
Dobar dan, evo nas, kao što je Aleksandar najavio, sada ćemo malo da pričamo o regionima i između ostalog malo ćemo pričati više i sa našim gostom, odnosno našim domaćinom, o tome šta je urađeno u Priboju. Pre toga ja bih zamolila gospodina Timona Veknerta da nam se, mislim da je tu na Skype-u, da čujemo kratko o projektu EU Green Rural Deal-a ili zelenog ruralnog dogovora, gde između Priboja i Srbije učestvuju još 2 regiona iz okruženja i 1 region iz Nemačke. O tome će nam malo više Timon reći. Timon, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So welcome to Priboj and welcome to Serbia. And we are looking forward to hear from you a little bit more about EU key project and about what is your view and what is your experience with some similar issues in other regions. What is going on? Yeah. Okay. Great. We can see the presentation now.
Good. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you. I've been listening to all the other presentations. It's been a very international panel. I was really excited. I would be more happy to be on site with you and discuss with you in a room, but happy to join here. What I'll present is a project, Green Rural Deal, which we are doing together with a group of institutions, and our S Foundation is one, and hopefully some stakeholders in Priboj will join in that project, because it is really about rural municipalities. What I want to say is just, this goes a little bit away from the energy issues which we've discussed, but it links very much to the jobs questions that the speaker from the UN has said in her initial presentation. Energy is related to jobs and economic questions, but if I look at rural regions, many of them have very specific questions and challenges. And one of them is shrinking population, aging society. People are moving out of the region. Skilled labor, often the skilled people move away. Old industry, so to speak, closes, and that is not very specific to one region, but many regions across Europe are that way. And I show you some data that I have, unfortunately, only for EU data. I don't have that data for Serbia. But if you look at how population developed over the last 15 years, the blue regions is regions where population has been going down. And in fact, if you look at East Germany, a lot of the population has gone down very strongly after 1990, especially in the rural regions. The reddish thing you see is Berlin. The rural regions, the blue regions, population has been really going down. I show you one example of one city. It is Hoyerswerda, a city in east of Germany, which has been a coal mining city, and it's been a small city. No, it's been a very small town for centuries. And then in the 1950s, coal mining built up and population was going up dramatically. Economic was thriving. But then with the reunification of Germany in the 1990s, the population was going down. This had nothing to do with climate or environmental issues, but economic issues. And I think Serbia has in the 1990s, many rural regions have experienced similar developments. I show you another example of a town of Dessau, where the typical East German housing style was predominant in large part of the town, but there again, population has gone down, and what people had to do was to tear down of those houses because they were empty, not enough people to live in. But they did not tear it down completely, and you see on this picture, and now on the next picture even better, they turned those huge building blocks into basically one-family houses. And that leads me to my next statement. Of course, there are a lot of challenges, and they're very specific challenges in rural regions, but I see that rural regions have also their opportunities. And question to you, I don't have an answer, is how could a sustainable development look like in a town like Priboj? And these are actually questions that we want to work with you in Priboj and discuss with you, but also in other towns in Kamenica, in Western Macedonia. And we want to support that process really with evidence, with knowledge, but most of all, we want to really engage with you and discuss with you what could be good projects, really projects that bring the region forward and that combine sustainable issues with environmental issues. That's what I want to give, and I hope that over the next 2 years, I do have an opportunity to meet some of you live and hand over back to the colleagues from RES.
Thank you, Timon. Yeah, we are also hoping that we will be able to host you in Serbia and especially in Priboj. And just to mention that this is the beginning of this project that will last for 2 years, and this is also our opportunity to say that we as RES Foundation, as a partner in Serbia, we are really looking forward also to work or to continue our cooperation with Priboj municipality. And with that sentence, I have again a pleasure to give a floor to Mr. Vasilić, who is the Deputy President of Priboj municipality, and he's going to give us a little bit more explanation where Priboj is now. I will switch to Serbia now. Tako da, evo, Saša, ponovo smo ovde i htela sam da vas zamolim prosto da nam malo date više informacije o tome kako izgleda energetska tranzicija. Priboj nije naravno slučajno izabran kao jedan od regiona i jedan od gradova u kojima upravo radimo na tome da promovišemo i održivi razvoj, energetsku tranziciju i transformaciju, pa eto da u ovom nekom razgovoru imamo 15 minuta da vidimo gde je to Priboj, gde idemo i kako možemo svi zajedno da dođemo do te neutralnosti o kojoj smo nekoliko puta već čuli.
Hvala, Tanja. Dobar dan svima još jednom iz Priboja. Pa evo, da kažem, put je počeo 2014. godine. Mi smo malo u Priboju specifični. Mi otprilike kad radimo taj put, hoćemo da kažemo sebi, hoćemo da dođemo tu za nekoliko godina. Znači, mi smo imali viziju Prvo što se tiče sistema grejanja javnih objekata i generalnog sistema centralnog grejanja, da napravimo konačno zamenu svih fosilnih goriva koje smo godinama koristili, a u slučaju Priboja tu je ugalj i mazut. Da napomenem da mi nemamo gas, dakle u Priboju. I da pređemo na naše gorivo, drvnu sečku, drvnu biomasu, drvni pelet koji se proizvodi u regionu, a kad smo mi planirali da radimo sve ove projekte, mi čak ni u Priboju nismo imali ni proizvođača drvnog peleta, niti naročito ne drvne sečke. U tom momentu zaista smo imali sjajnu saradnju sa nemačkom organizacijom za međunarodnu saradnju GIZ. Oni su došli u Priboj i mi smo otprilike se lomili kojim putem da krenemo. Napravili smo jako dobru saradnju i preko Srpsko-nemačke razvojne pomoći. Naravno, tu 2015. godine odmah uskočili su i naši prijatelji iz RES fondacije, tako da smo uz razne stakeholdere, naravno uz pomoć naše vlade, uz pomoć resornih ministarstava, Kancelarije za upravljanje javnim ulaganjima koji su nam omogućili finansiranje ovih projekata, ipak danas došli u neku situaciju da možemo da kažemo da smo prevalili dosta dobar put i da je taj put prilično dobro utaban i da nema povratka nazad. Počeli smo jako skromno, 2016. godine sopstvenim sredstvima otvorili smo jednu kotlarnicu na drvni pelet koja je grejala 4 objekta. Tu smo zamenili ugalj, građani su bili prezadovoljni. Konačno u starom delu grada nismo imali zagađenja te kotlarnice na ugalj koje je bilo veliko. Sada je situacija naravno mnogo bolja. Automatski nismo tu stali, već smo po ovom našem dobrom običaju, hoćemo da stignemo tu i tu, krenuli sa novim projektom, a to je bila gradska toplana za 4 škole, 2 srednje i 2 osnovne, i mi smo uspeli zajedno u saradnji sa Kancelarijom za upravljanje javnim ulaganjima, odnosno Vladom Republike Srbije, koja nam je 100% finansirala ovaj projekat, da tu toplanu otvorimo 2018. godine. I imamo krajnje pozitivno iskustva i sa jednim i sa drugim projektom. Uštede su velike, imamo odlično grejanje, svi su zadovoljni, tako da te toplane rade već nekoliko sezona, dakle, već su u funkciji. Opet mi nekako radimo paralelno, nikad ne radimo nekim projektima, kažem, ajde da završimo ovaj pa ćemo krenuti sljedeći, nego krenuli smo odmah da razvijamo i priču oko glavnog problema u Priboju, a to je grejanje na mazut, gde imamo sistem daljinskog grejanja u kojemu još uvek, evo još nadam se i siguran sam, ovo je posljednja sezona u Priboju koja će koristiti mazut za sistem daljinskog grejanja. Već 2017. godine uz pomoć Srpsko-nemačke razvojne pomoći, uz pomoć Ministarstva rudarstva i energetike, KfW banke, krenuli smo i u taj projekat i evo ove godine siguran sam da ćemo u oktobru mesecu svečano otvoriti to novo postrojenje snage 8 MW na drvnu biomasu, odnosno drvnu sečku, uz rezervno postrojenje od 15 MW na lož ulje. Tako, pošto nemamo gas, prinuđeni smo da imamo po zakonu energetici još jedan energent koji nam je rezervni energent. I siguran sam, a znate kad sam siguran da je to obično uvek tako, da gotovo to lož ulje nećemo nikako koristiti, jer mislim da ćemo uspeti u tome. Tako da ove godine ćemo, ako uzmete sve te projekte koje smo uradili i ovo što završavamo ove godine, imati ukupnu zamenu fosilnih goriva sa obnovljivim ekološkim gorivom, drvnom sečkom i drvnim peletom, ukupno instalisane snage oko 11 MW. Što ako pretvorite emisiju CO2 u atmosferu, znači ako otprilike vidite neku procenu, to je između 5.500 i 6.000 tona smanjenja emisije od 2021. godine, a to se upravo uklapa u ono što mi zajedno radimo sa RES fondacijom i kao potpisnici povelje gradonačelnika u našu obavezu da do 2030. smanjimo emisiju ugljen dioksida u atmosferu za 40%. E sad, pošto ja uvek kažem mi želimo neke svoje ciljeve unapred da postavimo, pa da ih onda stižemo, ja sam siguran da ćemo mi do 2030. godine 99% smanjiti emisiju ugljen dioksida u atmosferu i siguran sam da ćemo do te godine, gotovo sam ubeđen, imati carbon free sredinu i da ćemo biti jedna od, neću da kažem retkih, nadam se više ili mnogih opština u Srbiji koji će taj sebi cilj zacrtati, krenuti našim stopama i da ćemo umjesto onih kada gledate zagađenje u Evropi, u regionu, umjesto onih crnih i brown tačaka po Srbiji, konačno početi da dobijamo zelene tačke i da se ta lepa bolest, da je tako nazovem, širi po Srbiji i da konačno imamo zdrav vazduh za naše građane, a pre svega kroz ove projekte, kroz ovakvu energetsku tranziciju, kroz ovakvu lokalnu energetsku politiku, da imamo svoje gorivo, dakle energetski smo nezavisni, da imamo nova radna mesta, jer mi smo svedoci u Priboju, malo pre sam napomenuo, 2014. godine nismo imali nikakvu industriju po pitanju proizvodnje drvne sečke i drvnog peleta. Tanja, ti znaš da je to bila i tema GIZ-ovog projekta da se razvije tržište biomase u Srbiji i zajedno smo i tu radili, ali tržište se razvilo onog momenta kad su kapaciteti počeli da rastu, kad su projekti počeli da se razvijaju i automatski je ta neka naša lokalna energetska politika stvorila potrebu lokalnog biznisa da se razvija, jer su ljudi jednostavno videli mogućnost da zarade. Da otvore nova radna mesta. Ja mogu sada kažem da postoji već lokalna firma u Priboju, da oni zapošljavaju 30 radnika, dakle tu je 30 zelenih radnih mesta, da se bave proizvodnjom drvne sečke ne samo za Priboj, nego da su od severa do juga Srbije na tržištu i da dobro rade. Eto, i to je neka naša zasluga da smo uspjeli da razvijemo i lokalni biznis i da napravimo nova radna mesta. Naravno, ono što je najveći benefit ovakve politike je i ono što građani uvek pozdravljaju i na kraju krajeva i mi smo kao lokalna samouprava zahvali građanima na podršci koju imamo od njih. Oni su nam prvi faktori, zbog njih sve ovo i radimo, je ta promjena klime, promjena vazduha. Mi zaista živimo u zdravoj životnoj sredini. Mi smo uradili dosta u 2021. godine, dosta toga smo zamenili. Imamo još taj problem sa individualnim ložištima, oni nam prave problem, ali sam siguran da ćemo sljedećim godinama i taj program strateški rešiti. Već ove godine imamo određena sredstva koja ćemo ponuditi građanima, to je subvencija od 60%, da bi zamenili svoje individualna, neefikasna i prljava ložišta sa novim. To ćemo da uradimo i svake godine ćemo taj fond povećavati. Do onog momenta dok ne dođemo u situaciju da dođete u Priboj, da ja kažem, aj molim vas, nađite, ima li neko da zagađuje vazduh u Priboju.
Možda, pošto je danas dan energetske efikasnosti, možda nije loše da kažemo i šta je po tom pitanju urađeno, pošto je urađeno dosta i ima i tu planova kako da se dalje unapređuje energetska efikasnost. Postoji sistem energetskog menadžmenta koji je razvijen u Priboju, tako da, eto, možda par reči o tome samo da
Pa jako je bitna energetska efikasnost. U sve ove mere što smo radili, energetska efikasnost će konačno, kada i to radimo sistemski, strateški, kada primenimo sve mere energetske efikasnosti, na javne objekte smo gotovo, ćemo završiti. Ja se nadam za 2 godine neće biti nijedan javni objekat što se tiče Priboja da nije energetski efikasan. A što se tiče privatnih zgrada i stambenih zajednica, mi smo već krenuli prošle godine sa subvencijom od 80%, tako da smo već 5 zgrada prošle godine uradili. Ove godine smo se fokusirali upravo na sistem daljinskog grejanja. Da bi ovaj projekat koji završavamo, ovaj kapitalni projekat koji je vredan preko 7 miliona eura, koji se završava ove godine u Priboju, da bi pomogli mi iz lokalne samouprave sa sistemskim mijenjanjem omotača zgrada koji su na sistemu daljinskog grejanja. Tako da ove godine imamo 2 velike zgrade koje ćemo da uradimo i onda imamo svake godine sve više i više zgrada dok konačno tu priču ne zatvorimo. Tako da ćemo sa tim sistemom u stvari mi smanjiti potrošnju goriva i energenta, što je opet jako bitno, jer koliko god se mi dičimo i ponosimo što nećemo uvoziti mazut, nećemo koristiti ugalj, moramo također voditi računa o održivosti drvne biomase, o racionalnom iskorišćenju šumskog resursa, tako da ćemo na ovaj način uz mere energetske efikasnosti bukvalno štediti na energentu, što nam je na kraju krajeva i cilj.
Super, hvala. Evo mi ovdje imamo i male makete, šporete i toplane, upravo da prikažemo da to jesu neke stvari kojima mi hoćemo da i povećamo svest i ukažemo na mogućnosti kako stvari mogu da se menjaju, između ostalog i taj slogan. I evo, možda za kraj, Saša, da nekako kažemo energetska tranzicija i transformacija Pa nekad se čini da mi pričamo o energetici, a da li mi zaista pričamo samo o energetici ili pričamo i uopšte čuli smo održivi razvoj od Timona, govorimo o ruralnom dilu, o načinu kako možemo da čitavu sredinu unapredimo, pa eto ja znam da postoje i neke druge ideje za neke druge vidove energije i šta to sve u stvari znači, pored vizije da ćemo imati čist Priboj, koje su to još neka vizija koju možemo da podelimo?
Pa dobro, mi zaista gledamo da kroz ovu energetsku tranziciju pokušamo da iskoristimo sve vidove obnovljivih izvora energije i naravno da smo u sledećem periodu planirali da koristimo što više solarne energije i vrlo ozbiljno razmišljamo o tome da na javne objekte polako počinjemo da instaliramo i solarne panele i da koristimo tu energiju. Što više javnih preduzeća takođe doći će sigurno do smanjenja cena električnih vozila, pokušat ćemo, Priboj nije veliki grad i bukvalno možemo i na taj način uticati na smanjenje zagađenja. A ono što sam hteo možda da kažem pre svega, jer mi zaista ne razmišljamo u Priboju samo lokalno, pokušavamo da razmišljamo regionalno i osim što sam zamenik predsjednika opštine, ja sam i predsjednik radne grupe za biomasu i energetsku efikasnost Zlatiborske oblasti i mi želimo da ovo što mi radimo u Priboju prvo podelimo u našem regionu i na formalne i neformalne načine i kroz neke možda nove organizacije koje pokušavamo da napravimo, da konačno ovo što smo mi uradili krenemo polako, kao što sam rekao na početku, da širimo i na druge lokalne samouprave. Ima pozitivnih primjera uz podršku države, opet moram da kažem, u Arilju se gradi nova toplana na drvnu biomasu, Užice već, što se tiče mera energetske efikasnosti, grad Užice je već poznat u Srbiji da to radi jako dobro i mi, ne stidim se da kažem, volimo i da učimo od njih, jer gledamo šta su oni uradili i ono što oni rade mi bukvalno volimo da primenimo, ne izmišljamo toplu vodu. Kad neko nešto dobro radi, ljudi, dajte to da radimo. I nadam se da će Prijepolje, Nova Varoš i Bajina Bašta iz ovog našeg regiona krenuti našim stopama i da ćemo ovaj region jugozapadne Srbije, Zlatiborskog okruga, Zlatiborske oblasti, zaista napraviti jednim ekološkim regionom i regionom u koji će ljudi rado dolaziti, da ćemo sigurno tim našom energetskom i regionalnom lokalnom politikom dovesti do porasta broja turista i da će ovo biti jedno od omiljenih predela Srbije gde će ljudi dolaziti baš iz tih razloga.
Hvala puno. Evo, mi se isto nadamo i verujemo da ćemo nastaviti u Priboju da govorimo o ovom zagrljaju između, jel tako, naroda i obnovljivih izvora energije i da nećemo doći do sudara. I mislim da je, evo, ovim smo završili ovaj deo. Ja ću sada pozovem samo kolege da idemo na naredni panel. Ostanite sa nama još malo i pričamo i dalje o energetskoj transformaciji iz Priboja danas. Hvala.
Evo nas ponovo u Priboju i evo ponovo mene. Ovog trenutka ću biti moderator, a malo kasnije ću pokušati i ja da podelim sa vama neke detalje iz studije o energetskoj tranziciji koju smo radili uz podršku Friedrich Ebert fondacije i pre nego što počnemo da pričamo o samoj studiji, pozivam gospođu Ivanu Račić iz Friedrich Ebert fondacije da nam se obrati. Ivana, nadam se da se čujemo.
Čujemo se odlično. Hvala, Aco, dobar dan iz Beograda. Srdečno se zahvaljujem RES fondaciji sa kojom imamo dugogodišnju saradnju na pozivu da u okviru današnjeg razgovora i ovog panela predstavimo i najvažnije nalaze studije koje upravo nosi naziv energetska tranzicija u Srbiji, kolizije ili kohezija ili kako ste vi kao organizatori još lepše definisali zagrlje ili sudar. Na samom početku bih istakla da ovaj proces se ne odnosi samo, kao što su i mnogi pre mene danas rekli, ne odnosi se samo na promene tehnologije ili emisije ili na način upravljanja proizvodnjom, distribucijom, potrošnjom energije ili veoma često pominjanim velikim investicijama, promeni u javnim politikama, ali pre svega i ono što je možda najveći izazov jeste promena svesti svih aktera u lancu proizvodnje i potrošnje energije. Ono što je nama kao Fondacije Friedrich Ebert veoma važno i ono na što stavljamo posebnu pažnju, poseban akcenat jesu socioekonomske promene koje energetska tranzicija donosi, da ona mora biti pre svega pravedna, da mora imati u vidu interese svih uključenih aktera, naročito radnika, i da mora kreirati uslove za dostojanstven rad i kvalitetne poslove. To je naravno proces kome mora prethoditi promena u društvu koja će potom voditi ka njegovoj dubljoj transformaciji i opet naglašam da mi kao fondacijama pokušamo da sa svojim partnerima, upravo i sa vama i sa ostalima, podelimo najbolje primere dobre prakse zemalja kako Evropske unije ili sveta koje su uspešne na ovom putu energetske tranzicije. Nažalost, svedoci smo da u našem društvu postoji preovlađujući stav da energetska tranzicija neki daleki cilj o kome ne moramo još uvijek da razmišljamo, iako ovaj pogled potpuno odudara od realnosti koja nas okružuje, kako u Evropi, tako i nekih svetskih trendova koji su aktuelni. I nažalost ovakav pristup bi Srbiju i njene stanovnike mogao puno da košta, mnogo više nego od često pominjenih visokih investicija koje su neophodne. Dovoljna činjenica da stanovnici Srbije mogu da vide ovih dana vazduh koji udiši, koji je daleko od zadovoljavajućeg kvaliteta, a u svetlu klimatskih promena i sve većeg zagađenja ovaj prelazak je neizbežan, trajeće nažalost više decenije i zahteva učešće svih aktera i sektora u društvu i zato insistiramo da se on mora dešavati sada i odmah. Evo, podsjetila bih samo da je pokazatelj da je koliko smo mi daleko od te realnosti, koliko drugačije percipiramo, jeste da je svet već u 2018. godini, da je ukupno 26%, ako se ne veram, od ukupno proizvedene energije u svetu došlo upravo iz obnovljivih izvora energije i da je taj procenat u stalnom porastu, dok više od 70% električne energije u Republici Srbiji se proizvodi iz uglja. Ono što smo mi želeli i što je cilj bio ove naše studije koju ćeš kasnije ti detaljnije predstaviti, jeste da ponudimo pregled gde je Srbija danas u odnosu na ostatak sveta, na Evropu, gde smo u ovom procesu, da ponudimo neka razmišljanja, da damo neke poruke u kom pravcu treba da idemo ili da usresredimo zapravo napore društva, a pre svega da ih trebamo uskladiti sa posebnostima Srbije u ovoj oblasti i da možda na osnovu toga oni koji su uključeni u proces donose možda i neke odluke u skladu sa tim smernicama. Ja se još jednom zahvaljujem svim panelistima dosadašnjim na veoma interesantnim i inspirativnim izlaganjima. Prepuštam tebi, Aco, reč kao koautoru studije. Zahvaljujem se takođe Jasminki Jung koja je učestvovala na izradi studije uz napomenu da je studija objavljena na engleskom i srpskom jeziku i da se može pronaći na sajtu Fondacije Friedrich Ebert. Hvala vam.
Hvala Ivana na ovom uvodu u kome si ti već, da kažem, podcrtala glavne okvire kojima smo se rukovodili, u kojima smo se kretali kada smo pripremali ovu studiju. Ja neću imati danas PowerPoint prezentaciju zato što je studija relativno kratka i pozivam vas da na sajtu Friedrich Ebert fondacija, uskoro i na društvenim mrežama i na sajtu RES fondacije nađete ovu studiju i da je pogledate i nadam se pročitate. Ja verujem da će biti zanimljiva da uokviri neka buduća razmišljanja o energetskoj tranziciji u Republici Srbiji. Mi nismo, radeći ovu studiju, izmislili niti otkrili toplu vodu. Evo, toplu vodu su otkrili ovde na brdu iznad Priboja u Pribojskoj banji, tako da mi nismo imali potrebe da otkrivamo toplu vodu, ali čini mi smo da smo želeli da podcrtamo da energetska tranzicija, kao što su rekli i svi koji su se danas uključivali u ovaj naš panel, nije samo pitanje elektrona, neutrona i nije samo tehničko pitanje. Po našem dubokom uverenju, energetska tranzicija koja podrazumeva dekarbonizaciju kao ishod je ozbiljna i velika društvena promena, ali se ona ne može ni odigrati bez prethodne društvene promene. Da tako kažem, potrebno je da se promeni način na koji donosimo odluke da bismo ušli u proces energetske tranzicije koji će svoje ishodište imati u dekarbonizaciji, a sam taj proces će uzrokovati dodatne društvene promene. Svi se mi pomalo bojimo promena, naročito ovakvih kao što su promene koje zahteva energetska tranzicija. One su na neki način i tektonske promene društva, ali tektonska promena društva je svakako i suočavanje sa posledicama klimatskih promena i to takva tektonska promena na koju možda nećemo moći da odgovorimo. Čuli smo iz prethodnih izlaganja kuda se kreće svet, čuli smo i kakva su dešavanja u opštini Priboj. Mislim da je to interesantno da smo postavili na izvestan način dve reperne tačke kroz ta prethodna izlaganja, kroz koje možemo dobro da razumemo koje su posledice nečinjenja i kuda se kreće globalna energetika. Priboj je opština i ovaj kraj uopšte je kraj koji je bogat obnovljivim izvorima energije. Dakle, nije možda tako teško napraviti opciju za energetsku tranziciju u jednom regionu koji obiluje hidroenergijom, koji obiluje potencijalima biomase i koji manje više obiluje i potencijalima za proizvodnju energije korišćenjem sunčeve energije u meri u kojoj to Srbija obiluje takvim resursima. Dakle, energetska tranzicija, promena iz sveta u kome je nafta, prirodni gas i ugalj su dominantni izvori energije, u svetu u kome su voda, sunce i biomasa dominantni izvori energije. Ja mislim da je to promena u koju Republika Srbija može da uđe, ja mislim da je to promena koju Republika Srbija može da izvede. Šta mi tvrdimo u našoj studiji? Neizbežno je za sprovođenje energetske tranzicije kojoj je krajnje ishodište dekarbonizacija, znači prestanak neto emisija gasova sa efektom staklene bašte, neizbežno je napustiti proizvodnju energije iz lignita. To je promena velikih razmera i takvu promenu naše društvo nije izvršilo u poslednje vreme. Poslednji put kada je naše društvo izvršilo sličnu promenu je bilo vreme u kome smo ušli u lignit, jer lignitski sektor, i o tome nešto kratko govorimo i u studiji, nije sektor koji je nastao 8. dana stvaranja sveta, nego je to sektor koji je bio posledica donošenja političkih odluka negde krajem 60. i početkom 70. godina u našem društvu i iz tih političkih odluka i investicija koje su sledile i ukrupnjavanja resursa radi ostvarivanja tih političkih odluka izašao je elektroenergetski sektor kakav poznajemo danas u ovom svom termoenergetskom delu, koji nas je dobro i verno služio 50 godina. 50 godina je dugačak vremenski period. Ovde u Priboju 1953. godine je napravljena kompanija FAP, koja je napravljena takođe u nekom okruženju koje je tada važilo. Prošlo je 70 godina, nema više tog FAP-a koji je postojao od 53. pa do relativno skoro, ali nema više ni tog okruženja. Dakle, neke vizije imaju svoje rokove trajanja. Mislim da je vizija koju su donosioci odluka imali kada su pokrenuli stvaranje elektroenergetskog sektora kakav danas poznajemo u Srbiji istekla i da je krajnje vreme da imamo novu viziju koju moramo potom sprovesti. Dakle, izlazak iz lignita je apsolutno neophodan za energetsku tranziciju čiji je cilj dekarbonizacija u Republici Srbiji. To je jako težak zadatak kakav društvo nije u skorije vreme izvršilo. Po našem dubokom uverenju to je zadatak koji naše društvo može da izvrši. Posmatrali smo neke elemente za razmišljanje kakav bi to energetski miks mogao da izgleda u budućnosti u Republici Srbiji. Čini mi se da je važno da zapamtimo ono što nam je dr. Mates u svojoj prezentaciji danas ranije pokazao, da su procene tehničkog potencijala obnovljivih izvora energije u prošlosti bile veoma, veoma konzervativne. One naravno zavise od stepena razvoja tehnologija, ali videli smo da je 1993. su vodeći stručnjaci, kako je doktor podvukao, verovali da je 4% učešća obnovljive energije u energetskom miksu maksimum, da danas Nemačka ima 35%. Tehničke procene, odnosno procene tehničkog potencijala koje je radila Međunarodna agencija za obnovljivu energiju za Srbiju i uopšte za region su takve da pokazuju da u tehničkom smislu ima dovoljno obnovljivih izvora energije koji se mogu koristiti u procesu energetske tranzicije. Šta mi mislimo da je važno da razmotrimo pre nego što donesemo tu odluku? A takođe ono što mislimo da je važno je da se ta odluka donese društvenim konsenzusom, a da bi se ta odluka donela društvenim konsenzusom, ona se mora doneti na odgovarajućem mestu. Dakle, apsolutno je neophodno da se u Narodnoj skupštini Republike Srbije razgovara o energetskoj tranziciji. Mislimo da je jako važno da se predstojeći strateški i javnopolitički dokumenti donose u Narodnoj skupštini Republike Srbije, ne da to budu sektorski dokumenti, pa čak i međusektorski dokumenti, jer su posledice društvene promene koje energetska tranzicija zahteva veoma, veoma velike. Iskorišćavanje energije sunca i energije vetra je, da kako nije jednostavno ni tehnološki, ni u smislu investiranja resursa ljudskih i finansijskih, ali na izvestan način su ove tehnologije jednostavnije i iskustva iz sveta se mogu primeniti i na drugim mestima. Ono što je po nama specifičnost Republike Srbije je jedna od veoma, veoma važnih tačaka o kojima naše društvo mora da razgovara je mera u kojoj želimo da koristimo biomasu kao energetski resurs u procesu energetske tranzicije. To je resurs koji je, da kažem, ima svoje specifičnosti u svakoj državi, one su različite i koji ima, korišćenje resursa biomase ima široke društvene konsekvence. Dakle, ako se pristupi većem korišćenju biomase za energiju, to je proizvodnja energije koja zahteva veliku intervenciju u prostoru. S druge strane, ova vrsta proizvodnje energije može da zaposli mnogo veći broj ljudi u lancu proizvodnje nego neke druge vrste proizvodnje energije. Zato verujemo da je razgovor o tome kako i u kojoj meri koristiti biomasu u Republici Srbiji u energetskoj tranziciji veoma važan razgovor. To je veoma osetljiv razgovor. Ukoliko se loše upravlja takvim procesima, mogu nastati mnogobrojne negativne posledice i po životnu sredinu i po društvo uopšte. Sa druge strane, ukoliko se dobro upravlja tim procesom, može se obezbediti veoma snažan podsticaj za rast. Gledali smo malo i poredili smo i troškove različitih energetskih izvora. Naravno, to nije nikakvo naše primarno istraživanje. Dali smo ovde pregled nekih tekućih globalnih diskusija na tu temu i ono što, čini mi se, sad već svi znaju, troškovi proizvodnje energije iz obnovljivih izvora energije se jako približavaju troškovima proizvodnje energije iz fosilnih izvora i veoma često su niži od troškova proizvodnje energije iz fosilnih izvora, naročito kada se uvaže troškovi zaštite životne sredine i troškovi borbe protiv klimatskih promena. U studiji možete da nađete i poređenja u zaposlenosti između različitih regiona u kojima se eksploatiše lignit u Republici Srbiji i u Nemačkoj. Nešto od toga ćete moći da nađete i na prezentaciji doktora Matesa. To su slajdovi koje on nije danas uspeo da pokaže, ali koji ćete moći da vidite na prezentaciji kada ona bude dostupna online. I ono što nam se čini da brojke govore da nama neizbežno svakako, i ako se opredelimo da se zadržimo u proizvodnji lignita, predstoji smanjenje obima radne snage u ovom sektoru. Sve druge konkurentske industrije su smanjile broj zaposlenih u odnosu na količinu lignita koji se eksploatiše i u odnosu na količinu električne energije koja se proizvodi iz lignita. Dakle, čini nam se da je veoma uzak put ostanka na ovakvom termoenergetskom sektoru u kakvom se Srbija danas nalazi. Čak i ako bismo se opredelili da se suprotstavimo struji o kojoj su danas govorili prethodni govornici, koja je globalna i u kojoj se nalaze ponovo i Kina i Sjedinjene Američke Države i Evropska unija, koja zahteva dekarbonizaciju. Ako iz bilo kog razloga se naše društvo opredeli da se suprotstavi toj struji, čini mi se da je pred nama mnogo teži zadatak nego zadatak koji nam predstoji da sprovedemo energetsku tranziciju. Još jedan put da ponovimo, dakle, važno je obezbediti odgovarajući miks tehnologija da bi se sprovela energetska tranzicija. Bitni su troškovi, bitni su izvori finansiranja, veoma su važne društvene implikacije. Čuli smo u prethodnim prezentacijama da sve to zahteva vreme. Dakle, nije dovoljno doneti javno-političku odluku, kasne i projekti, veliki infrastrukturni projekti koji treba da omoguće energetsku tranziciju i na drugim mestima. Naša studija nudi jedan okvir za razmišljanje. Nadamo se da će i donosioci odluka i zainteresovani iz privatnog i civilnog sektora pročitati našu studiju koja je relativno kratka i da će ih to podstaći na dalje razmišljanje o tome kako na najbolji način organizovati i sprovesti energetsku tranziciju u Republici Srbiji, jer nam se svakako čini da je put organizovana i sprovođenja energetske tranzicije u Republici Srbiji mnogo jednostavniji, jeftiniji, isplativiji i društveno korisniji put nego put u kome bismo se borili protiv globalnih promena koje se u energetici dešavaju. Posebno mi je drago, i još jedan put ću tu podvući, da smo u prilici da razgovaramo o ovoj temi upravo u opštini Priboj, koja je krenula putem energetske tranzicije. Ne mogu se rešenja preslikavati i ono što važi u Priboju ne važi u Kruševcu ili Kragujevcu, ono što važi u Vašingtonu možda ne važi u Srbiji, ali čini se da je horizont jasan, da je energetska tranzicija sa ishodištem u dekarbonizaciji neposredno predstojaća aktivnost svima u svetu, pa tako i Republici Srbiji, i verujemo da bi kašnjenje sa odlukom da se sprovede jedna odlučna energetska tranzicija moglo da bude veoma rizična strategija Nadamo se da Republika Srbija neće preduzeti tako rizičnu strategiju i nadamo se da će i čitanje naše studije koje smo izradili u saradnji sa RES fondacijom podstaći sve one koji odlučuju o ovom procesu, a to smo na izvestan način svi mi, da se usmerimo na to kako uspešno sprovesti energetsku tranziciju u Republici Srbiji, jer u svakom slučaju mnogo je prijatnije završiti u zagrljaju nego u sudaru. Hvala vam.